Everybody ready? All right, welcome. Oh, are we on? Welcome to the April 15th GOC meeting. Welcome everybody here. Thank y'all for being here. Hopefully we'll have a short meeting today. We'll only have two items on the agenda. That's WMBE as well as STRs. Thank you, Shalisha, for sending out the last meeting minutes for March. Can I get an approval of those meeting minutes?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, have it, moving on, and we're gonna start with the, disparity study. It was sent back to this group body. I know concerns or questions from the community as well as our fellow, colleagues who have some questions. And Blank, would you like to go over, or Mr. Boyd, can you go over, uh, just briefly go over the disparity study that we're planning on, approving at our last meeting?
Yeah, I thought it might be interesting for everybody, because I know you're getting inquiries from the community, just to put in a simple format of what we are doing as part of the BI.
Yes, sir.
As part of the business inclusion program. I mean, the business inclusion program is really more than just that policy we gave you. But one of the factors in the disparity study was to expand our collection and management of data. So that's what we have been working on, and we'll touch on that for just a second. But, you know, going down this list here too, this is just giving you an idea of things that the procurement department or division is doing. And it's really in the lines of the business inclusion policy. You know, there were a lot of if you go back and look at the, in that presentation, the recommendations, about 3 of those recommendations had to do with contracts. So one of the things procurement is doing is they are working with the attorney's office to standardize contract templates, because if you have standardized contracts, it makes it easier for people in the community to participate. Also working on standardized RFP and bid solicitation templates. And we are using the Georgia Department of Administrative Services requirements, same thing for standardized insurance requirements. And as y'all know, beginning July 1, we'll be taking over that review process for contracts, the insurance requirements. We're also working on updating the policy and ordinance provisions. Some of those are 25 to 30 years old. And so we want to include inflation adjusted purchasing thresholds for quotes and proposals, but also right now from 1,000 to 50,000, you're required to get 3 quotes, not written, just 3 quotes. You can get them over the phone. What? You have to get them written, maybe over the phone. Okay, well, preferred written. What we want to do is what the previous, the retired purchasing, administrator wanted to do, which was to be able to, whenever possible, when you're getting quotes, you have a list of qualified MBE, WBE, and VA, whatever you want to throw in there, vendors that should be included in that quote if they meet the guidelines. We also want to just let the committee know, as well as commission ultimately, that I don't know if this is based on economic trends, demographic trends, a combination of those and other things we don't know about. But our solicitations for bids and RFPs, we're beginning to see, you know, we like to get at least 3, you know, to be able to evaluate those. We're seeing a trend towards receiving fewer than 3. So back in fiscal year 23, we did 36 solicitations. 5 or 14% were awarded with either 1 bid or they had to be rebid twice. Fiscal year 24, we've seen a big jump. So we've had 33 solicitations today. 14 or 42% of those either had no responses or awarded with fewer than 3 responses. And then across 23 and 24, 10 construction, architect, and engineering projects had fewer than 3 responses or no competition. So you might have just had one.
What do you attribute that to?
That's, we don't know if it's economic, demographic. You've heard, everybody here's heard that there's been trillions and trillions of dollars thrown in the economy, given the local governments, state governments, the federal government spending it. And there's just a lot of work out there for construction, companies and so forth. And it's just, it's given the construction vendors that remain more opportunities. They have more choices. So we may be, especially on our smaller construction projects, we may just not be getting.
It's not worth their time.
Yeah.
So with that being said, then, for small minority businesses, women-owned business, those projects could possibly be something that they can make it pursue or bid on.
As long as we have what the disparity study would call qualified vendors in that category. Yes. Yeah.
And I think most of us know this, we don't have, especially locally, don't have that many minority or women-owned construction companies. Probably the majority of them may be in the Atlanta area. Maybe
Or even out of state.
So that's a challenge for us as a government, trying to get those, those individuals to bid on those jobs. So I'm not sure what the answer is.
Yeah, we don't either. Well, this is sort of like going into combat and you don't know the terrain.
Well,
You gotta get in there.
well, conceptually, that's exactly right. But I think just for the person, that your constituent to understand what we're trying to do, okay? So there is not a balance in firms that exist that are minority owned or women business owned, or at least in this market. Or if there is, we may not know about them. So what this is, y'all, is a change in the government's behavior and process and policy to try and invite and have more people engaged. And what we all don't know is that or some would say they do know, one reason we don't have a lot of those types of firms is because folks weren't invited or didn't have the opportunity to break in, if you would. So I think one thing for folks to understand is what we're hoping for is a better future. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. We're going to change what we're doing now. We don't expect immediate results other than to have hopefully a much more diverse pool, people who have been invited to participate as vendors, and then we still go through the process. They still have to deliver a good job because y'all have a fiduciary responsibility. But, and I'm sorry to back up here, and I know I'm new to the table, but for me, the way I've rationalized all of this is there's a situation here that needs to be addressed. And it's bigger than just our government. It's a societal thing, it's a market-driven thing, but we can do things within our own processes to help change the trajectory. Will it do it overnight? No. Can we change it a month from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now? Absolutely. That's the whole point. That this is just the next 5 years based on what folks who are in this business told us we ought to be paying attention to. And we can tweak it to however y'all like to, but we've got to get in it to start moving forward.
That's what I'm a bit confused about. I wasn't real sure, because we spent a lot of time talking about this at previous meetings, and I'm just unclear as to why we sent it back, because I thought that's what we were doing when we had it on the agenda. So maybe somebody can
at least
understand.
maybe when we got some feedback from the minority African American community in general, that it doesn't expand enough services.
Yeah.
About mainly what we're looking at, construction, architect. Don't look at stuff like, I'm not sure what painting will fall under, or cleaning service will fall under, even maintenance will fall under.
Yeah.
We don't, those are not, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, those are not a part.
And that's what we addressed on page 2.
Okay. Those, okay. When we looked at it initially, Mike, they were saying, well, don't bring from, I'm concerned with the construction part, the architect, more construction part, and not the other services that we can provide as a unified government. It will not be a cleaning services, where you may have more women and minority contracts in those to their maybe painting, maybe landscaping. So I think they want to expand that scope, which wasn't initially, and you correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't initially as part of the study, was it? Or was it?
Well, the disparity study had to be done in accordance with court rules and regulations and laws.
Case law.
So the thing is that, they looked at our spend, they looked at where we spent the money, they did their analysis and they come up with their conclusion. So when they look at the 5 industries and they look at their estimated available vendors in each of these categories, they're just estimating that. And so when we go up, that's what we would use it as an aspirational goal if we so chose to do that. But that is not local. I think what I'm beginning to hear from y'all is it doesn't have a local enough focus. And so on page 2, just so you have an idea and you can tell your constituents, you know, one of the main recommendations in the disparity study is that we expand data collection and management. Now, Samantha, who is our community business procurement coordinator, has been actively going through and cleaning up our internal active database. Now, we can go out to places like Georgia Procurement Registry, and if we put a bid, well, we have to put all our bids and solicitations out there. If we put all our solicitations out there, we can tell how many MBEs and how many WBEs and how many VA groups that met those job codes, got the solicitation. We can tell you how many responded to that. And if you go back to the last MBE report that we discussed at the very beginning of the business inclusion policy, they could do that back in 2011 too. So we've always been able to do that. It's locally that it gets a little murky, and that's what we're trying. We're trying to clear the water. So first thing we're having to do, I've got it highlighted. We have an active database right now of 1,831 vendors. Now, when I say active, those are vendors that are not payroll related. So, you know, we've got, I mean, on that sheet I handed out. Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm sorry. And I went to the trouble to page on it. It was in PDF. But when, you know, you look at the total vendors we've got in our database, we've got around 4,000. A lot of those were inactive. A lot of those are employees get paid a reimbursement for travel. A lot of those are things that occur around payroll or debt service payments and all that. Well, that has nothing to do with this. So getting it down just to active vendors, you know, that are on our database that would stand a sporting chance of getting quotes and so forth. We have about 1,831. Just a week or two ago, it was higher than that, but we've cleaned it up some more. But let me give you the process that we're doing so you can explain it to your constituents. So far, we've reviewed a total of 66 of these 1,831 vendors, and we're looking at 3 different locations to get an idea of where these vendors are registered and if they're already certified, either MBE or SBE or WBE or veteran owned, because some of these others like SAM.gov, they'll do SBEs, MBEs, you know, but they have a long drawn out process, application process. So you've really got to want to get on the federal database as someone who is meets one of these criteria to go through that. If we look at the Georgia Procurement Registry, we found that of the 66 we reviewed so far, 16 are registered on GPR. And you can see over here that of the 66 we reviewed, when we look at SAM.gov or Georgia Procurement Registry, we found 21 on SAM, found 16 on GPR. Only 2 are MBE and 2 are WBE on those sites. And 21 are SBE because SAM.gov will let you register as a small business owned. But looking at the Georgia Procurement Registry, if you want to become a part of Georgia Procurement Registry and you want to get on as an MBE, okay? Now, at first we thought you had to go through the Georgia Department of Transportation and get your DBE and all that. That's not really true. That's only if you want to be in the construction side of things, but if that's not it, you don't have to. But the Georgia Procurement Registry does require vendors to go through the 6 certifying agencies I've got listed at the bottom here. And we're not going to go over all of these. I mean, but this will tell you, and this will tell your constituents, if they want to look at this, this is what they have to go through. If they go through one of these formats, or one of these agencies to be certified in their respective fields. Now, we've developed our own internal certification process. So what we've got to do is go through all 1,800 of these vendors. We've got to find out who is already certified. We've got to find out who is not certified. So those that are not certified, some of those we can tell that they're just white male owned vendors. Some of them we can't. So we've got to be able to reach out to those people and tell them, if you want to be, certified MBE or WBE within our database, here's our certification process, or we can direct them to one of these. It's an educational process. It's a community involvement process. So we have done that work. We've just got to go through and build our database up so that we know who is who.
But can we expand to like the maintenance, the painting, or do you say?
Oh, that's what it'll all be.
If I could ask, so there is a section called other services.
Yeah.
That's 10%. And then there's goods, I mean, in the initial study.
Yeah, okay.
It had construction, architecture, engineering, professional services, other services, goods, and
Yeah.
overall.
Yeah.
Now, we wanted to try a couple just out of the gate, and where we saw the most money being spent, so what Finance Director Boyd talked about, by far, most of what we spend is there. And can we, get those contractors beginning? Because, you're probably not gonna have a lot of, MBE upstart general contractors. A lot of times they start off with subcontractors and you expand your, So all that being said, if you want to add one of the aspirational goals in here for us to track, that's fine. But I think what David's telling you is, doesn't matter. We're getting in touch with all our vendors.
Right.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing. Right now, the way our purchasing policy and ordinance is written, if you spend between 1,000 and 50, you're just required to get 3 quotes. If we know who our database is, so if we know that if you're going out for plumbing services, okay, we know from the anecdotal evidence that was found in the disparity study that a lot of times people will use the same vendors over and over to get quotes on. If we know there's a WBE or MBE plumbing service that is local, it's in our, I guess if it's in our database, it doesn't have to be local, but chances are it would be. Then we can request or require them to include that vendor in the quotation process. Doesn't mean they'll get the bid, but it does mean they'll be included in the process. So once we know who's in our database and we can reach out to those that we don't know who they are and see if they want to certify one way or the other, then we have a working group to start with, as well as ongoing educational, activities down the road to get these people on board in our database. That's the way we're gonna get local people involved in the process, is that 1,000 to 50,000. And let's say we update our purchasing policy and ordinance. And those things haven't been updated for inflation at least 20 years. So let's say we can get that 3 quotes up to 80,000 just on an inflation adjusted basis. Then those people that are within that 80,000 you would have to get 3 quotes on, that just expands that range. So of people who could potentially be in the quote mix for those jobs. So
Is a different way of saying this, that it doesn't matter what sector you're in, this is gonna be the new behavior for us. But the aspirational goals, just having those initial 2 is more from a tracking perspective. So what you're saying is, we're gonna be doing the work anyway, and so if you wanna add a couple more aspirational goals, that's not gonna change fundamentally this process, procedure, or what we do. If that's what the concern is. And local is also important too, but go ahead, Commissioner Fisher.
So what I would suggest, I'm not sure whether y'all have done this yet, but, there is a, local black chamber of commerce. I'm not sure whether y'all reached out to them.
yeah, Sam's already met with them.
Okay, and they supposed to have a list. Okay, I had not seen that list. I'm not sure who's on that list of vendors on there. And then I think Michelle Tucker Pierce has a group,
She got one of
the
these.
same thing, so again, that may be at least a start.
That would be a start to see if those people that are on those lists are even in our vendor database, right? So then that would just become part of the, data collection and management process. And that's what we're trying to do over the next coming months is get that complete.
So to answer Commissioner Hamlet's question, that's why we're back in here.
Yeah.
I think the community is asking us for these type of things and asking what are we doing?
Yeah.
I think now that we know, we can go out and say, this is what we're doing, this is part of the process. And we're gonna move forward as the government to make sure that those other services they talk about are expanding and adding into them, so.
And these, what we're talking about here on this page too, that's gonna become part of policy. That's gonna become part of purchasing policy.
Right.
That won't be part of the business inclusion, because this has to follow the disparity study guidelines. So this will be following case law,
Right.
doing it that way. And this will be our own internal policy.
And I like that better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So real briefly, I'm gonna run down some stuff, amongst us colleagues. So, this disparity study sunsets in 5 years because it's done that way so we can start at a point, review it, and then come back and look at it. So it's not like it's gonna end, because we can, if things change, we can adjust it for, future iteration. There was talk about doing a policy board. I hate boards. They're too time consuming, but you guys don't want to chime in about a policy board just over, and looking at our procurement process. And I don't mean to offend any of my constituents, but I told them, just no more boards. Point system, do we give points to people who do contract? Reward contractors, okay. Do we reward people who are local? Like, do we give them a point system, or there like a rate of how they are contracted?
The answer is no. And so that's called a preferential policy. I think Savannah does that. They did a study on the front end as well. So I've heard of those before. And one thing I do want, when I said local, we need to talk about local. So of course, this is based on a 31 county region that sort of stretches over to North Atlanta. And I know a lot of folks equate local with within the county. And I would tell you that increasingly, whether it's homelessness, water, whatever, we are an urban center of a regional area. And most of our workforce doesn't come from here. And so if you certainly could have a local preferential policy that could be just to the county. But in terms of this policy, when we say local, we mean 31 county area. Okay, and I don't know if everybody understands that. And if we only limited our selection to ACC, then they're going to be less in the pool, so you'll have less competition, and you may pay more, or you may give up some on quality depending on what the vendor is. So that, I didn't mean to conflate the two, Chair, but you could do that. We would want to talk with the attorneys and learn, what kind of steps we would need to go through to enact such a thing. But you can do that, and it doesn't have to be saddled with this, that you could have this policy and a separate policy later.
Okay, and so another question people in the community had, so based on our charter, and it's through a grace of God to change the charter, got to go through the state. Things got to run through the manager's office. It's just how things are set up. So, there's no way around that other than changing, our charter.
Well, if I could ask the nature of that question,
Yeah.
because I would think it really comes down to accountability.
Mhm.
So I am in the purchasing officer, but these folks do all the work, really. I have to sign off on things and make sure that it's done well. So if not me, then who?
Yeah.
So what's that got to do with this?
I'm just answering, people in the community.
But I mean, you could assign it to somebody else, but they'd have to be accountable for that.
And you're fine. Apprenticeship program. Do we have something similar to that we do, that we reward contractors who do apprenticeship program? Or do you have a program, a policy in place?
We don't have any criteria that would
Okay.
award a bid to somebody who may have a feature like that. Now, is that something you could ask future vendors? I know that was done with the artist, but you need to let them know on the front end because they'd have to build in their time and money, to facilitate that. But it's not currently required or there's no point system per se.
Yeah, and the disparity study did not address it. So, really you have two different types of programs. You have the race and gender neutral or race and gender narrowly tailored. So the policy that we brought before you was narrowly tailored. They also recommended some governments just do SBE, small business enterprise. But then again, that's not narrowly tailored. That's not based on race. That's based on the size of the organization, how many employees, which geographical area. Because like Savannah, I think Savannah, theirs is just like within the city limits of Savannah. And that may be something we can look at down the road. I mean, we got to understand where all our vendors fall. I mean, if our goal is to try to be inclusive of certain groups such as MBE or WBE, we've got to know how many we've got. Because I remember, in fact, if you go back and you look at where we ended up, when the previous program ended, only 4% of vendors were MBE. And so we've got to see if we are at that level or below now, because the world has changed since then. There are so many purchases that are made now from essentially big box. This is the world of Amazon and Home Depot and Lowe's, and that's where you do a lot of your purchasing. So there are still some small vendors out there. I pass them on the way to Winterville every day. Lowe's Electric, it's out there on Old Hole Road, and places like that, and some plumbing places. But for the most part, the world has gone corporate. It's cross state lines, cross countries. So there are a lot of local groups like Commissioner Fisher was talking about. And I think that's what we've got to focus on first to make sure they're involved in the quote process. They're not gonna be involved in the bid process because they're probably too small and couldn't provide that level of service, but at least at the quote level, they could be involved.
Are there any other questions from my fellow colleagues?
I want to say did we put into the community benefits thing with the mall an apprenticeship type? I don't remember.
I remember that too. I know
It was discussed, but I don't know where.
What am I?
At the mall?
At the mall community benefits agreement, we may have put in some sort of apprenticeship type deal.
Is there CBA recommended? I can't remember for the MBE. For this.
and no community benefits agreement affiliated with this at this point.
Okay.
Here, but the mall had,
We did.
and that'll, that's coming back to you next month
Right.
for the transit station.
Motion to move it back to the full man commission.
Yeah, okay, now we can go out and explain what we're doing and.
And if you have any questions on anything that's in this handout today, just send me an email and, we'll look at it and respond to it and give you the best answer we can.
While we're in discussion here, and David, we haven't talked about this, but if we can do a one pager that sort of explains what the policy is and what it's trying to accomplish, could that be helpful to y'all as you share with folks?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
David, I'll work with you.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay, vote.
Now vote. Motion to move to the full man commission. All in favor?
Way too long. So.
Okay, short-term rentals. Did we get any maps or any update? All right.
Yes, sir. John Hawkins is on the call and he has prepared information for you and is
ready to answer questions if you have any, but I'll pass around maps to be prepared in response to what we heard you guys discussing last time we met. So two sides on the map, the side with the little bitty dots on it. This is meant to be all-inclusive of all of the 804 short-term rentals for the period prior to the moratorium. And we broke them into two categories, those that have the homestead exemption and those that do not. Now, we also heard your discussion asking for a heat map. So on the other side of the map, you have two heat maps. One that at the top during the page is total 804. And then the one at the bottom are just those that have the homestead exemption. Well, we thought that the larger scale one was probably closer to what you were looking for. Please let us know if this format is not working. I'd be happy to adjust.
Can you give us 1 minute to look this over and does anyone of my colleagues have any questions?
Have any of the numbers changed since the last time, as far as permitting?
As far as new permitting, we've had 2 additional home occupations issued since last time we met.
Okay,
We've had contact with one other person that was interested in coming through the plans review process as a commercial short-term rental,
right.
but they have not made application yet to come through plan review.
Okay.
So right now, locally, if somebody want to come, say, I want to do a short-term rental, they can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Since the day after you guys had adopted, since the mayor commission adopted the ordinance changes, we've been open to accepting applications. Okay. What's on this map, though, are just those properties that would be under consideration for the legal non-conforming for that year prior to the first moratorium. Understand? That's what's on the map.
So looking at this map, it would be Commissioner Fisher, Link, Wright, and Taylor, who seem to have the density. Do y'all have any?
Oh, Andy's got it on here too now, come on.
It's like 5 points in East Athens.
Oh, yeah.
Well, man, more East Athens was over me, and 5 points, I'm like,
Do what now?
they look like East Athens and 5 points.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
You have 5 points?
yeah.
Okay.
I don't have that, I mean, I'm looking.
Go ahead.
I mean, there's a whole bunch in the Hancock neighborhood too, if that's.
Do y'all have any questions or?
Well, I've been doing some looking, and I'm just trying to wrap my brain around all this and try to see how we can make it a bit simpler, if there is a way. And I know it just seems like every county in Georgia that's doing some sort of regulation is getting sued one way or another. So, not really, I guess that's gonna happen if it's gonna happen. But, for example, like Tybee Island, they do, they allow, short-term rentals in commercial areas. And they've allowed, some in residential areas, but with some existing ones in residential areas, but with some regulations associated with them, like the number of folks that you can have in a given night. They've also, established some penalties, like if you get 3 citations for a piece of property, then you lose your license to operate. And they also, but the one thing they do is they ban from here on out any future short-term rentals. So, I don't know, they're just trying to ban future short-term rentals in residential areas.
Can we do that?
Mr. Hoffman.
Yeah, sorry, I'm remote today.
This is
So-
Tybee Island, very heavy.
So if I understood the question, it was, can you ban outright short-term rentals in residential areas? Was that? So that there are 2, I think there are a couple of sort of intermingled there. So one is the concept that we've talked about legal non-conforming. And so, I think if we were to do something like that, you would have to be able to address any legal non-conforming short-term rentals, and we'd have to figure out the best way to approach that. The other thing that comes into mind on that just initially is when you're talking about banning them outright, are you talking about what we have been referring to as the commercial versus the home occ, or just per se wholesale some sort of ban across the board?
John, what Toddy's doing is they allow them in commercial areas, but they have banned any new ones within residential areas, and they've put some regulations on the existing ones in residential areas.
Yes,
So
sir.
be just existing.
So you ban new ones in any new ones in residential areas.
It's certainly something we could look at. I mean, we could certainly check that, and the case law on this, as you all know, is developing too. So we could do a little research to see if there's anything out there that lends us some guidance one way or the other. I suppose the other thing we'd have to think about too is if we were to change that, we would be changing what the current regulations are for single family residential zones. So we'd need to think about how to address that and any amendments that we made. But those are kind of the initial thoughts that I have right offhand.
I'm kind of, I'm into this idea of limiting the number of guests. And from what I understand, that's what some municipalities do. You limit it to 4 guests. Some of these might fade away because their business model is based on packing them in. And those are particularly in the single family neighborhoods, I think. I just like to put some, the problem is these are disturbing neighborhoods and they're pulling away from our housing stock. And if we can up the ante on, qualifications to even get that license, and require things like security cameras and signage so people can report when there are violations, and make sure that we, have a process by which they can lose that license if they repeatedly violate basic local ordinances.
Okay, can staff speak on how the 4 limiting 4 guests, how that work? How would that be enforced? Excuse me.
And I think it's been addressed in the memo that you received from Attorney Hawkins, and I would agree with it.
They advertise, I stayed in one last weekend in Memphis and it said no more than 4 guests, although it was a 3-bedroom house. And my husband and both our mothers.
Well,
I can speak to that a little bit. And so, obviously, I would refer to the memo, but I think legally that is certainly something that we could bake into our current existing short-term regulations. I think the trouble you run into, or this one I would encourage everyone to think about, is the enforceability piece. It's one thing to have an ordinance on the books, but when you're dealing with like private residences, it can be very difficult for the police department or our code enforcement.
Well, yeah, and that's where I think requiring a porch cam could come in handy. So if there is evidence of violations and neighbors start reporting these violations, you can say, hand over your porch cam video so we can see how many cars were coming and going and the people that were coming.
That's definitely, that doesn't tell you who's staying there.
No, but we could definitely limit the number of cars too.
Well,
I think that's one of the big problems is people have with the cars blocking the streets and coming and going.
Well, here's what I was trying to say about, just looking at the topic, I don't know if that's the one that we should look at, but it seems to me that, unless we put a stopgap measure in this, then we're going to continue to take up staff time and try to enforce it. So let's, we've got, if we can put some regulations on those 804 now, like don't be driving a bus full of people up to Riverbend Parkway and expecting everybody on that bus to stay at this house. Then that's not going to happen. Or, you know, and then offer up also, if you have more, I think they have, if you have more than 3 violations, cited violations, then you lose your business occupation license for that use. So, you know, and I'm just talking about in residential areas. So in commercial areas, it seems like it's under control as far as if somebody wants to rent an Airbnb out at game day. I don't know that that's an issue.
Okay, so,
But the other thing is also, I don't know what we're charging for the business occupation license fee for somebody that wants to get a short-term rental, but
It's based on the number of employees and it's consistent across all categories, so.
well, and see, that's something we have, you know, I hate to throw a new monkey wrench into it, but, you know, a lot of these folks don't have any employees or just
Yeah.
one employee.
Well, I think 0 to 1 is $100.
0 to 1's $100,
Yeah,
yeah.
then it goes up from there.
I think we should create.
But this is almost like a professional license. I know we charge more for a professional license. I mean, these,
Could we come up with one that's based on the number of bedrooms or number of guests allowed?
you can do that, but you can do,
Because they're.
you see where I'm going with this. I mean, I think if we're having to do this, as staff's having to do this extra work, if we have to hire somebody on weekends to go and check on making sure that people are are within compliance of any regulations that we have, then it shouldn't come out of it shouldn't come out of the general fund. It needs to pay for itself.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think you can charge for this. You just can't charge more than the program cost to be administered. I think I heard that concept early on. So I say all that to say, and I do want to, it's $50 for 0 to 1 employees, but it's a $50 administration fee. And that $50 administration fee is constant for everybody if you had 1,000 employees. So I didn't mean to mistake.
But I think in lawyers and professional businesses pay more.
so, okay, with the existing SDR that we have on the books now that we voted on in February, some of these, are non-conforming and need to be shut down in 2 years, correct?
The way the ordinance was adopted in February, there was a 2-year sunset provision following the completion of
Yeah,
the documentation.
and that should be done in October or, okay.
So it's about 200.
So those are the, just trying to, so those are the ones that I'm concerned about. Those 200, correct? 200, that are non-conforming, not in compliance right now, that, so what should we do with those individuals, those business owners? So keep them, so we have one side that says, okay, we want you out of our neighborhoods. Then we got the other side that says, hey, we just try to make some income to, so what the ordinance is that we just, agreed on, those people are not in compliance, have to end in 2 years. So is your Tybee Island direction, keep those existing or they end as well in 2 years?
The Tybee Island one seems a bit simpler. It does keep them existing, but it places regulations on how many people can stay at that residence. But the other thing that interests me about the Tybee Island one was it doesn't allow any new in residential areas. So, and then it has the regulations about if there are some problems associated with it, like I think if you get 3 more citations, you lose your ability to do it. So basically what Tybee's done is put a cap on what they allow in residential areas.
So that would go, because the ordinance that you all adopted in February effectively it limits them in the residential areas too, unless primary use of the property is your residence.
Yeah,
Right.
So, me as a,
Or if you're a long-term renter.
or if you're a long-term, if the primary, in all the residential zones, the primary use of that property cannot be for people to come and go on a regular basis and only, and not somebody live there long-term. So it would allow the homeowner on the football weekends to get out of town and rent their house. It would allow, but it is not restricted to owner because that creates some legal issues with dormant commerce clause and treating out-of-state people different than locals.
Okay,
So I am interested in making some allowance for these kind of part-time residents where you have the grandma and grandpa who have a house that they stay in, 3 or 4 months a year and over Christmas or whatever, family homes. But maybe there could be a regulation where it's considered a short-term rental if it's rented on those sites for, more than 60 days a year or something. So it could allow some small use of it. For a good portion of the year, it's a personally owned property that's used by a family.
and so the
I
homestead,
think effectively that's what you adopted,
Yeah.
where with the exception of these 800
Yeah.
that you
But
placed
it
the
wouldn't
2-year
necessarily
provision.
have a homestead exemption on it. That's the thing, like, these are properties that wouldn't necessarily have a homestead because owners might actually live out of town and they're just coming in town for extended stays, visit family.
You see, I don't know that we would want to do that.
I mean,
I mean, to me, it's, from an enforceability standpoint, if I own a house here, but I've moved to the coast and I want to come back 2 or 3 times a year and stay for 2 or 3 weeks, I don't know how we would enforce. You can rent it some, but you can't rent it more than,
certain number of days per year.
it effectively, the primary function of that property is how we define commercial short-term rental, that for 48 weeks out of the year, you have the potential of there being a different group of people in that structure constantly turning over.
Well, I don't think we have to lose sight either of what we're trying to achieve, and that's just making sure that neighborhoods stay neighborhoods and
so
we place restrictions on personal care homes and halfway houses. I mean, it's all fraternity sororities. I mean, we only limit those in a certain, limit the number on this area here, so.
So my objective with the SCRs, send something to the full mayor commission that can pass. So I'm listening to both sides. The other side is there are people with existing, who have existing SCRs in neighborhood, don't want them, period. Like, some of these neighborhoods are getting gobbled up. I don't say gobbled up, but, they're a nuisance. So they like the 2-year sunset, like, hey, make your money, and in 2 years, either you put that home on the market or, do whatever, but, so I want to address that as well. With my colleagues, that there are residents in our community we're just fed up with these, weekend traffic, weekend parties, and
That's where the accountability comes in. Like, let's mandate signage, so there's a number right there at the curb for folks to call, and start keeping track of violations.
Well, I mean, so a lot of this stuff happens around football games. So 4 people stand there, they got 4 friends come over. Neighbor complains, what do we do then? And we struggle, y'all, with 2 people unrelated. I mean, short of going in the house, which is not something we typically do, it's very difficult to prove those things. So I only say that to say, I understand where you're trying to get to, and certainly not trying to say no to those things, but if you could end up where the residents are even more frustrated because we're not able to really tell who it is and deliver those citations.
That's kind of why I'm saying, let's put the number down. This is all we're gonna accept in this community as far as residential short-term rentals.
And what you're saying is we're at our cap, right?
Yeah, I mean, at 5 points is at the.
I mean, the thing is, there's a big chunk of these stuff
Well,
that's zone multifamily, and there is no cap.
Well, Savannah has a cap per district. I think it's like, I don't know what the cap is, but they have a
If
cap.
you were to look at that, Mike,
Doing
I like that cap per district. I mean, I'm not sure.
Savannah does that, correct?
What?
Savannah.
Okay.
Right.
I guess I'm trying to address what Patrick is saying. We got these 800 in there right now. What needs to be done to control that and to put some regulations on it, and then just stop taking, I mean, even in commercial, stop taking It doesn't, I mean, I just think, you know, they have changed. I mean, they're changing the way neighborhoods are, I mean,
Okay,
it's not being neighborly.
so put a cap on the system to keep the ones that we have now. Then maybe have to change the ordinance, correct?
We'll change the ordinance.
Anyway, yeah. But that's a big crux of the ordinance in fact. So put a cap, add accountability, uh, 3 penalties, so that require additional staff, right?
Assignment.
And we got the folks, so that'd be police officers, code enforcement, um, and magistrate court, magistrate, the municipal court. So for these penalties, there's still gonna have to be due process, right? There's gonna have to be, can y'all go over that? Like, just an additional person that needs to be hired? Do you have to write up? How would, you have to create new policies? How would that work?
I mean, I think part of it is just a matter of where the ordinance ends up in terms of enforcement and number of people. There is a position that was included as part of the work to adopt this ordinance that is housed in code enforcement. That's kind of a coordinator.
Yeah.
But Manager Williams is correct that, you know, from a standpoint of trying to regulate things such as number of persons, somebody's going to get a call and say, there are 12 people at this house across the street from me, and you go knock on the door and there are 12 people in there. You've got to be able to prove that all 12 of those people are going to be there in the morning, you know, and they're not just over visiting because they've got friends in for the game from out of town and everybody's meeting up at this house and then they're ultimately leaving. You know, I don't, from an enforceability standpoint, those are the kind of things that I think will create a lot of problems with number.
I guess I wonder how other communities enforce it. I mean, certainly we're not the only ones talking about STRs in Georgia or in the country, so it's somehow or another is getting enforced.
So whoever we hire to scan the sites, keep up with this information, like when you list an Airbnb, you list the number of guests and you list the rules. You know, we could scan it for, you know, properties that are listed for more than 4 guests, or, you know, let the owners know that you're not allowed to list a property in Athens-Clarke County that has more than 4 guests.
So just a limiting of gas.
And, you know, people will still, you know, they'll still pack people in, but it would certainly discourage it.
But there's other violations. They could also be.
Yeah.
Like with the 2 per family, you know, there's other ways that you go about enforcing that ordinance.
But it's just a discussion on limiting of gas. So like there's an Airbnb near me, and it's in a single family. It has 4 bedrooms. So when I think about it, when it's listed, it's 2 people per bedroom. So that's essentially 8 people. If we're going to continue to, if we're going down the road of Happy Island and continue what we have on the books now, we'll essentially be telling those, we'll be only enforcing what we currently have on the books down to those 4 people or more. You know what I'm saying? So anybody who has 8 rooms or can occupy or can do SDR for 6, 7, 8 people, they can't be in existence no more.
I mean, that's kind of the point, is to weed out the properties that are more likely to cause the problems that we're hearing about. You know, so maybe the owner of that property decides it's better to put it on the market or rent it out to the family. If it's, you know, no longer desirable as an Airbnb because.
The party house of mine, the big one that I had, it was only 2 people every time. It was husband and wife, maybe some kids, and it was their guests that invited over. Yeah, so
People weren't staying.
so what I'm trying to get at, like the number of people who are occupying the STR is irrelevant. It's the people, it's the activity.
I mean, and that's where our loud and unruly gatherings ordinance should be coming into play. Like, I think that's maybe a discussion we need to bring back to the table, because that's not getting enforced.
I do think you run into potential issues. I think it was addressed in one of the earlier memos from Attorney Hawkins. When we're dealing with non-conforming properties, from a legal standpoint, it becomes very difficult if we had no regulations on the book at the time that these uses were established. We then create regulations. It's legally, I think it's a challenge to go back and try to impose those regulations on uses that came into existence prior to those regulations. It would be similar to, you know, if we've got a legal non-conforming restaurant, White Tiger, over in Gulf Boulevard, and at the time that it was established, it was allowed, and ordinances changed, and we're going to change it to go back and tell them now they can't continue to operate unless they put in 27 parking spaces. You know, that's the whole nature of what legal non-conforming status means. I think the issue that this group, a lot of issues, but, you know, the 2-year sunset provision that was added by the planning commission that came to you, you know, was the issue that, you know, is 2 years the right amount of time?
I mean, what I have my hard time wrapping my head around is that in these single family neighborhoods, you're not allowed to have more than 2 unrelated people living in the house. So, you know, a homeowner can't have 2 roommates, yet you can rent the entire house to God knows how many numbers of people just coming and going randomly throughout the year. Like, it's just,
Well,
the
I guess
disparity between those 2 activities is humongous.
one fundamental question. Do you feel like we have too many STRs right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Commissioner Hamby's offering a solution, at least in part. There was 2 sides to that. One was the number of people, but one is saying in the future, in these residential areas, we're not going to allow any more, right? So that's one question I think John and Austin heard, and y'all were going to look into on that. So I just want to make sure there's some common agreement on at least that.
So the other half of our commission there are some who don't want the existing to exist.
Sure. And there's, as y'all are struggling with it, you know, there's just issues on how you do that legally and with due process. So I think just sort of maybe putting a limit, upper limit on future ones, that's where the discussion. And the second part of the Tybee ordinance you were talking about was just restricted to the number of people. And that's kind of where we are right now. Yeah.
And I think any other violations that are already on.
Yeah, and a mechanism that we out.
They have a good neighbor policy, I think, but that's part of their local.
Okay.
Well, if I could real quick though, and I'm catching up with y'all. So the 2 things that are now required, if you wanted to be a homeowner and have an STR, I guess either way, you've got to have a zoning validation. What's that? What would you call that?
Right now, it'd be a home occupation permit
Okay.
to move into single family residential.
And I think I hear you saying, Commissioner Hamby, that, so is that considered a privileged license? Is that the right term, like an alcohol license? Because I think we got into this a little early on. I can't, and I guess the question is, could you revoke that permit if there were some violations? Because I don't think you can with the business occupation license.
It's not a license. I mean, it's more of a land use policy, and it's no different than, yeah, from a home occupation standpoint, you come in, if you meet certain criteria set forth in the zoning ordinance, then you can receive that home occupation, whether it's to do short-term rental,
Right.
Or to run your attorney, you know, an attorney's office out of it under criteria, home office.
So there may need to be a new permit if you want to try and assign some type of privilege to that, to where you can revoke it if it's, you know, but I'm going to defer to John, and I'm just hearing 2 different things. I don't think you can do that with what we currently on the books.
You can be in violation of your home occupation permit though. So if we have something documented on how you're going to perform and it meets the ordinance and you've given us details on X, Y, or Z, if it turns out that you are no longer functioning by those terms, you're in violation of that and we have enforcement proceedings for it.
Does that include having too many people over?
No, it does not.
Right. So there are some parameters where you can lose that license, but they're very limited.
Parking and documentation about the physical setup of the property. But the actual use, the number of people coming and going was not reached.
But can the commission add that to it?
And that's the question. I think
I mean, could we come up with a specialized home occupation license for this use that has additional terms that would make it
What we got.
affordable? Like,
Well,
because it is a different use than, running a hair salon or, a mail order business.
But it's the concept that if somebody has too many violations, that we could not give them a permit in the future. Is that what you were?
I'm saying if they get too many violations, then revoke that permit.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
So right now, they're limited to only a couple of things.
right.
Right. The types of things that we can do, but it's not the frequency. So if they violate it once, we have enforcement proceedings that we can do. It's just a very short list of things that we're tracking. And they're meant to be relatively practical things that are easy to observe and document.
Easily enforceable.
Yeah.
So John was gonna say something.
Well, it's like, I'll just say this too, it's, special use permit. If a fraternity's violating that special use permit, there's ways where we can take away that permit for that fraternity or that sorority.
Because that's not an administrative approval. That's a special use that's been granted by the
Right.
county
And
commission.
I guess what Melissa, I'm hearing Melissa say this, and I don't disagree with it, maybe that we need a special class of license for the short-term rental. I mean, basically, it's not a lawyer operating in a house. It's, as it stands now, it's a busload of people coming to a house to have a good weekend.
But
Would we require the STRs that are already functioning if we were to go along with the special permit to operate it? Would they be held accountable to now apply for that license, even though they see?
And I think that's what we've advised, that the legal non-conforming, we don't feel like we can go in and create a bunch of regulations that will impact those legal non-conforming uses.
Yeah.
Just don't.
Well, I would say this,
We could.
I mean, the permit, every time, you have to get a permit home occupation every year. It renews, you have to renew it every year and pay the fee every year.
That's the tax certificate you do, not that, they don't come in every year and get a new home occupation.
They see finance every year. They don't see the planning department.
Yeah.
I guess I'm looking at this as more of a business instead of in a neighborhood instead of.
So-
Occupation, 'cause
I mean, I'd like to see that it be a more specialized home occupation where there's also a higher fee,
So based on,
let me just say this real quick. The definition, home occupation means you're living in that home and you're having an occupation in that home. STRs they're not a home occupation.
Okay, let me touch on that. We've leveled the playing field on that though by definition to where we can issue home occupation permits for salons or other things to a tenant. And so I guess you're questioning short-term rental as a home occupation, just fundamentally. Like, because it is a commercial operation. We currently allow for commercial operations with limits in your home, whether you're a tenant or a homeowner. So that's where we tried to level the playing field with home occs.
Yeah,
For
and
short-term rentals.
so that's not the problem. I mean, we're not terribly concerned about the ones where people actually live. It's the ones that are standalone,
Right.
strictly for renting out on Airbnb.
And
Even if you're renting the
that's
property as a
class of
long-term
use.
tenant and occasionally rent it on Airbnb.
And I think that's where we get into the dilemma of how we deal with the non-conforming, these guys that are out there now versus moving forward in the residential neighborhoods, residentially zoned areas. The only way that you could operate a new short-term rental would be under the home occupation
yeah,
application, which means that first and foremost, the house is used as a home, but that person has the ability to also on football weekends or in graduation or something to get out for a weekend and let somebody live there. Be rented.
okay, so we're not unfortunately come back to this,
Well, we've given the attorney some questions to look at.
to look at, but I still feel comfortable with changing 2 year to 5 and going down the road of a administrative officer. Did I hear that right?
I don't feel comfortable with that. So just so you know.
No, that's fine. Moving from 2 to 5 years. I think that's recommended by my attorney and some of the STRs that I spoke with agreed that give them time to unload and, successful. Yes,
But, okay, so within that, and we're still talking about it, within that 2 to 5 year relief valve, we can still implement no new ones popping up within that time though, or, I'm sorry, I'm done.
I mean, the way the ordinance is written now, the only new ones that can pop up in the neighborhoods are as home occupation.
yeah.
That's all you've already approved that.
But
And just to remind everybody, the way that we have, that Athens-Clarke County has done its ordinance is through land use. And so, that's done through our zoning ordinance, and that's why we're having some of these discussions about legal non-conforming, home occ and some of those things. So just so we're all kind of, reading from the same book on that, I just want to kind of reemphasize that point. That's how they're regulated presently in Athens-Clarke County.
Can I get a motion to do 2 to 5?
We still got some questions that the attorneys need to answer before we start taking motions on stuff like that. I mean, that's.
So the 2 to 5 really doesn't change the Tybee Island, because the Tybee Island model is, if I'm hearing it correctly, it's just keeping the existing as they are and changing them to, and adding penalties so they can, adding penalties if they don't comply. But
Let's let the attorneys come back to us with some of the suggestions they've heard today, some of the concerns, and let us digest this. And let us hear from some of the folks most impacted by it. So I think we've given them a lot to think about. I'm expecting a decision for us to decide this today. We've obviously still got some time to work on it. So let's do it right.
all right, teammates, colleagues.
Okay with it. Yeah, okay.
So our next meeting will be in May. Be May 20th. Do y'all want a special call?
It's fine. We get some, we get a special call. We can't, but we got budget stuff coming up in May too.
All right, staff, y'all have your marching orders? Your directions?
Um,
Motion to adjourn.
well,
Go ahead.
no, please. Well, just looking ahead to the next meeting, so obviously STRs, and I think we have our dirt road policy ready as well, but your ability to help us. What's going to be
Let's
on that.
finish up this, let's finish up these STRs at the next.
Oh, no, it would be the first thing, but if you want us to have the thing ready.
Yeah, cause let's see, their road is just, data that, Remy, forget his name,
Stephen,
Stephen, yeah, we can do SDR. We can do SDRs and dirt road.
well, we'll have something in the backup in case we get through STRs pretty quickly.
Yeah, let's do STRs first.
Yes, of course.
Ron, we had a motion to adjourn, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Yes.